Also, we just had, from His Excellency, the President, and I'm glad that we are able to come up just after that. I want to recognize Smart24 TV, with whom we are in partnership to ensure that we reach you with the FAT Talks. FAT Talks stands for Faithful, Available, and Teachable. In Africa, we believe that we have everything to succeed, everything that we need to succeed. And one of the issues that we've had in Africa has been the issue of ethics. I think we've seen it with the iron sheets. We've seen it with what's happening in the corporate governance world. There's news coming out of Switzerland. The bank environment right now is in dire straits. We've seen that these problems are also not only for Africa; they are for the whole continent. And one of the things that we are talking about in the FAT Talk is how do we ensure that Africa has a governance system, has leaders that are accountable, has leaders that are willing and available to stand and speak for the voiceless. We are currently on Twitter Spaces. We're trying to fix our technology. There's about 4 different technologies that we're working with right now that are really giving us the test of our time. And one of the issues I want to state is that I think as we go into the 4th industrial revolution, we need to embrace technology, embrace how to use it. So now we're on Smart24. We are live in 5 different countries in East Africa. My name is Fiona Wall, and with us we are going to have Shadrach Igu. He is in-house counsel, and he's going to speak to us about the role of in-house counsel as the conscience of an organization. Shadrach is online, and one of the things he does is that he is general counsel for Infra Credit. He is also, he's a lawyer, of course, and he has had an illustrious career. And Infra Credit itself is a AAA rated specialized infrastructure credit guaranteed institution that is backed by the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority. I'm going to ask for a minute because I'm trying to ensure that our listeners on the Twitter space are on board with us. Just give me 1 second as I navigate this technology and we see what to do. Okay. So he heads the legal function of the institution, and he's the first one of his kind in the institution. And his institution is actually a AAA rated specialized infrastructure credit guarantee institution backed by the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority. He's speaking to us all the way from Lagos. He's going to explain exactly where he's talking to us from. And he has this institution. I need to talk about it. When you are AAA rated, it means that the World Bank and other institutions trust you. It means that you're liquid. It means that you have the credibility in order to be able to back any infrastructure investment, to give any letters of credit to huge global businesses. And so far, this institution that he works with is backed by the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority, Guarantor, KfW Development Bank, Africa Finance Corporation, and they provide local currency credit guarantees and mobilize long-term debt financing for infrastructure in Nigeria. He is a lawyer that I respect as somebody who served as in-house counsel in the past. He's somebody that I've listened to, and he has an experience of 12 years advising and working closely with development finance institutions, lenders, sponsors, borrowers, and institutional debt and equity investors. Right now, with what is happening, with what is coming out of Switzerland, and other countries and Europe, what's happening with Credit Suisse Bank and all the banking drama we've seen across the East African landscape, we look at in-house counsel sometimes as the people who might make or break an institution. Shadrach has also had deal origination, structuring, and execution exposure from his time as vice president and senior transactor in Infra credit from 2020 to 2022. This is a lawyer who knows his numbers. I really salute you, Shadrach. Before joining Infra Credit, Shadrach was a visiting associate at Templars, which is a big Nigerian law firm. It's a leading Nigerian law firm. He was selected by the International Lawyers for Africa, ILFA flagship secondment program, and he worked with Norton Rose Fulbright. I think we all know that that's an international law firm that we all aspire to work for. He was also a pupil under the auspices of the Commercial Bar Association of England and Wales at Gatehouse Chambers, and he has done a lot of work having begun it in banking and finance at Dan Lauren Merrifield Limited, which is now DLM Capital Group. He is a qualified barrister and solicitor in Nigeria. He holds a Master of Sciences, a degree in finance and financial law with distinction, I'll say, from the University of London, a graduate certificate in project finance from Middlesex University, London, and a Bachelor of Laws degree from Ebonyi State University, Nigeria. Wow, my tongue is exhausted, Shadrach. For somebody that has done only 12 years under his belt, I think that we are in good hands. Today, we are speaking about the role of in-house counsel as the conscience of the organization, as a driver of change, and sometimes as the person that drives the ethics of the organization. Shadrach, would you like to say hello to us? Thank you. Thank you, Shadrach. Now, one of the things we are talking about today is ethics, the role of ethics. The role of ethics. Let's start with, because as the Fidelis Leadership Institute, we're all about ethics. And once again, I want to let everybody online know, especially our Twitter listeners, that we're very sorry we started a bit late. We were trying to ensure that our East African viewers on Smart 24 were online. And now everybody's online. We're on Smart 24 live. This recordings will also be played on all our spaces on the Fidelis Leadership Institute pages and the Smart 24 TV pages. And one of the things, Shadrach, we're talking about right now, and I think it's the time for the season. You are in-house counsel. Just please explain to us roughly what in-house counsel means to you. I know that in some jurisdictions, I have been told that even in-house counsel are listed by the regulator as inactive on their practicing certificates, which sometimes shows a lack of appreciation of the role of in-house counsel. So explain to us, what does this whole word mean? Because we have a lot of people online that I'd like to recognize that are not necessarily lawyers, but our biggest fans and are listening from all over the world. So like Mr. Muhere Zacham Tetera, we're very proud to see you here. a proud member of the Public Relations Association of Broadcasters, and somebody who has Public Relations Association of Uganda, and somebody who has been known to be an eminent communicator and journalist, especially around the corporate world. So Shadrach, what does it mean to be in-house counsel? Yes. Yes.
But essentially, this in-house law.
I speak louder. Him. Turn the volume. Thank you, Shadrach. That explains this role very well. Now, what do you, in your role, what would you say is the role of ethics? Is the role of because we're talking about you being the driver for compliance, the driver for anything to do with the law, especially legal compliance, but also looking at legal risk, looking at areas of legal risk, and sometimes the risk can be even reputational, looking at matters of ensuring that your especially now, this is a financial institution, for you to be AAA rated, there are so many compliance loopholes that you have to skip through. As in-house counsel, what would you tell a young in-house counsel? What are the loopholes you look for when you are dealing with issues of ethics, issues of compliance, and making sure that, because you see, when we say compliance, it's like just going with the line of the law, but ethics seeks to increase the standard. And we've seen that governance has become a real issue now, and ethics have become almost a legal obligation. When you look at case law that has come out recently, the issues we've had with the Sarbanes-Oxley cases and things like that on governance. So as in-house counsel, and now not speaking as just in-house counsel, but on the issue of leadership in Africa, leadership in institutions and organizations, especially organizations like yours that handle huge portfolios, what would you say is the role that you would play? Is the role that you see in-house counsel playing in influencing change, in influencing increased compliance, in influencing ethical leadership in institutions? Role that you see in-house counsel playing in influencing change, in influencing compliance, in influencing ethical leadership in institutions?
Thank you so much, Phil. That's a very interesting question with obviously very important implications. In-house counsel sits and in many cases, the positions can be very dynamic, requiring the in-house counsel to take different roles and responsibilities at the different times. And these roles can sometimes be offensive, i.e. when the counsel is responsible for supporting the company, the business, the institution as its business partner, to enable it to achieve its objectives. But at the same time, the in-house counsel, as you mentioned, is also responsible for making sure that the company has complied with provisions of law, provisions of internal policy, and such and such. So sometimes the role is offensive, and sometimes the role is defensive, which makes it such that the in-house counsel a lot of times need to be able to balance their responsibilities to make sure that the company is able to achieve its objectives, and at the same time is able to comply with its responsibilities, whether it's internal or external. Ethics obviously plays a very big role in this, particularly as it relates to the legal counsel and his or her role in shaping the ethics within the organization. As lawyers, primarily, ethical considerations in most countries, in the UK, Nigeria, and I'm sure in all countries across East Africa and the rest of the continent, plays a very key role. Lawyers are required to conduct themselves in a certain way and to make sure that those around them, whether it's in their personal or professional lives, also conduct themselves in a certain way. I'll draw, for example, from the rules set by the Solicitors Regulatory Authority, which is the institution responsible for regulating lawyers in the UK. Under the SRA Guidelines, lawyers are required to act in a way that upholds constitutional principle of the rule of law and ensure the proper administration of justice. They're required to act in a way that upholds the public trust and confidence in the work that they do. They're required to act with independence, with honesty, with integrity, and act in a way that's also in the best interest of their client. Now, with all this in mind, it clearly means that the lawyer, particularly the in-house counsel sitting from where they are, have a deeply embedded responsibility in their role to ensure that relevant policies are in place, to ensure that all players play within acceptable ethical and moral standards, that the law is complied with at every point in time. And more importantly, the in-house counsel has a role for educating people within the relevant institution to make sure that they are aware of their responsibilities, their ethical obligations, and that the appropriate governance standards are in place for that institution. At Infra Credit, for example, the rule of thumb for us is that we follow minimum international best practices as it relates to governance, and that at every point in time, the compliance level with governance obligations are at the very best level. I think I will pause there for now, and I will sort of allow you to further the conversation.
Well, you've really put it very well, and I like how you talk about the importance of in-house counsel to educate, because sometimes as lawyers we assume that everybody knows, and we're always proudly saying ignorance of the law is no excuse. But as in-house counsel, you're also sort of like the godmother of making sure, when you have a godmother, when you're baptized, this godmother is now in charge of you, making sure that you follow the law so that, your Christian principles and the vows that they made on your behalf are actually followed. Now, in this role, and now this is where I would like to hear from you, Shadrach. Growing up in your role, because you first worked in a financial role, you worked as one of those people that need to be educated by in-house counsel. We were lucky that you were a lawyer. What would you say from that perspective? How did you, we also, one of the things we like to do on these FAT talks is to ensure that our young people out there that are being inspired, understand your journey somehow. You have very clearly stated the role of in-house counsel. You've really clearly stated what you view as how you are doing this and how your company is doing this. But what was your journey like between, especially I'm interested in, of course, would like to know where you grew up and where you are right now. But I would also like to hear, did you always want to be a lawyer? And then did you always want to work in finance? I'd like to know to be a lawyer. And then did you always want to work in finance?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Shiva. So maybe I'll start from the beginning. At the moment, I live and work in Lagos. Lagos is in Nigeria, West Africa. I was born in the southeastern part of Nigeria. My parents are from a tribe called the Igbo tribe, which is one of the sort of three prominent tribes here in Nigeria. My undergrad was here in Nigeria as well. After which I made the decision to work at an investment bank. I started out as a compliance officer, which I thought was very interesting because it allowed me to, at a very early point in my career, to appreciate the importance of compliance. Compliance with internal policies, with laws, with well-established international best practices and the likes. And obviously, as compliance officer, my role was to check that everybody else within the institution was doing what they ought to do, and where they're not, make recommendations on what we can do to fix any gaps, any risks that are perceived, and to also advise management on what we need to do to deal with those risks that arise out of non-compliance. After working on sort of in that compliance role for a period, I decided that I wanted to work on the transaction side. Obviously, it's one thing to check the transactions to make sure that they've been done properly, but I also wanted an opportunity to get on the deal side and be part of the creative process, if you will, designing these transactions and getting them to market. As you know, Nigeria, like many other countries on the continent, is in dire need of development, it's in dire need of financing to ensure that we can create jobs for our people, that we can grow our economies, and create an environment that can really sort of provide the springboard for the next phase of our development. And it was extremely important for me that I was part of that process. So I moved in to join what was at the time called the Corporate Finance Advisory Group at DLM, Donler and Merrifield Advisory Partners, the firm I worked with at the time. That allowed me to get involved in a lot of structured finance transactions, a lot of corporate finance transactions, and essentially just mostly debt capital and equity capital markets transactions, raising financing for different companies to finance projects, create jobs, and help grow the Nigerian economy. I was there for a while until 2014 when I went away to do some additional studies, and then ultimately joined Infra, where I am now. Obviously, in between, I have done a number of other short-term responsibilities, including my time at Northern Rose Fulbright, which was extremely exciting because I got the opportunity to work on deals across the continent. A lot of the deals that I worked on were actually transactions that were implemented here on the continent. So it was great to have that experience. And then obviously now my role at Infra, what we essentially do is to support the development of infrastructure here in Nigeria. Infra, as you sort of mentioned earlier, was founded by the Nigerian Sovereign Wealth Fund with support from the UK government through Garanco. And essentially what we do is we identify areas where we can support in the development and financing of infrastructure projects. Whilst we're a commercial institution, we're also obviously very development conscious. So for us, the impact of the work that we do create is extremely important. So we're constantly tracking, well, how many jobs are we creating? How many of those jobs are going to women, for example? How many schools are we able to facilitate the development of access to water supply, access to clean cooking fuels and things like this? So it's very important what we do, and it's extremely even more crucial to ensure that we do it properly, because if we do it properly and ethically, then we're able to attract more funding. And more funding equals more access to opportunity, more development, more jobs, better quality of life for our people. So that's sort of how I look at it. So for sort of a young person who might be listening to us, I think it's important that they sort of appreciate the value, the benefit, that sort of ethics in play, just broadly speaking, in being able to work at and sustain institutions such as this.
Our speakers, our guests, to tell us at least one lie about themselves and one truth. You're not going to tell us which one is the truth and which one is the lie. That's a game that our members, our listeners usually indulge in. And we're going to put it on a poll on the Twitter space and even down here on the screen. So, Shadrach, what would you say is a lie and a truth about you? Tell us two things, and it will be up to our audience to choose which one is the truth and which is the lie. What would you say is a lie and a truth about you? Tell us two things, and it will be up to our audience to choose which one is the truth and which is the lie.
That's very interesting. Okay, I will say, so two things. I will say that I have been to, what would be the line, not to be the truth. So I would say that I have run in 4 marathons. And the second thing would be that I have recorded a song as an artist. So those would be my two. I'll leave it for the audience to work out which is true and which is false.
Wow, I'm getting more and more interested in Shadrach the man. I'm more interested now. You've piqued my interest, Shadrach. Do you have family, and or are you single? You know, while we're mentoring, we also take care of other things. The second thing I would like to ask is, as a successful young man who's done, sorry if I may call you young, but I'm quite, well advanced in age. As an advanced, focused young person, gentleman in the financial and legal sector, and somebody who's worked in high intense activity kind of workplaces, what would you say? And I think I hear women being asked this question, but I also see that a lot of men sacrifice a lot in building their careers, and sometimes other balls drop. What would you say to that young person who wants to make it, but also wants to have family, wants to have a social life? Because listening to your career and cramming that in 12 years, that's quite a feat, Shadrach. We are hats off to you, but also we're asking, do you have a life? And what would you say to those that would want to be like you, but also want to know whether there's a way you could balance? Say to those that would want to be like you, but also want to know whether there's a way you could balance?
Thank you, Shiba. I thought that's quite that's an interesting one.
It's Fiona, actually. I'm using Shiba's phone, but this is Fiona Wall.
Got it. Thank you, Fiona. Thanks. Excellent. So I do have a life. If I'm completely honest, I didn't always have one.
Yeah.
I didn't always have one. I think early in my career, the tendency was to prioritize certain aspects of my life, in particular my career, and put that sort of front and center, and put everything else beside and behind it. In hindsight, that may not have been the absolute best decision. And so if there's anyone who's maybe thinking about doing that or who's doing that, I can certainly say that it's not a good idea. I think that for every person, whether sort of at the early stages of their career, middle or end, it's important to have a nice balance and to keep an eye on all the different aspects of our life and sort of make sure that we're balanced throughout, whether it's in terms of our physical life, physical activity, things like meditation, exercise and stuff to keep us healthy, whether it's in relation to our spiritual life, whether it's in relation to, just in general, it's important to keep family life and so on, to keep a healthy balance across the different, I think there may be about 8 key aspects of our lives, because we find that we're fuller, happier, more fulfilled human beings in doing so, and we're able to impact those around us more meaningfully, and even make an impact in the world more meaningfully. So my recommendation would be to such a person to keep an eye on the different aspects of their lives and ensure that we have a fair balance. Like I said, I didn't always do this, but this is something that I've come to embrace now, and I actively keep an eye on it and make sure that I'm conscious of it. I'm single, but I should hopefully get married sometime soon. But I am single at the moment. But yes, it is extremely crucial to have a balanced approach to life in general. In terms of social life, I do have a very active social life. The nature of the work encourages a bit of social aspects, and personally as well, I certainly do socialize quite a bit. Yeah.
I am being inbox super very excited, Shadrach.
Yes, so it is. I think it's important to keep an eye on these different aspects. Yeah. So balanced life is a happy life.
So thank you so much. And we know as lawyers, we rely on our social life, on our networks to succeed in the work that we do. Now, one of the things I wanted to ask you on behalf of the young people here, well, first of all, you're in Lagos, right? I think I didn't hear where you were born. Now, one of the things I wanted to ask you on behalf of the young people here, well, first of all, you're in Lagos, right?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Okay. Were you always in Lagos? I think I didn't hear where you were born.
Yes, I was born in Southeast Nigeria. My parents are from the Igbo tribe, but I have lived in Lagos off and on for the last maybe 12 years.
Okay, so as a gentleman that is working in a very intense financial environment of international global relevance that closes the biggest deals on the African continent, how do you deal with the challenge of maybe people that you work with considering you young, or I don't know whether you've dealt with this, but with all the financial direct investment coming in Africa, sometimes you will find yourself, I don't know what the case is in Nigeria, but we use a lot of, foreign law firms when it comes to our big financial deals. And sometimes it's a challenge if you're a young African lawyer to sit at the table and feel like an equal, not because you're not an equal, but because of perception. How do you, as in-house counsel, and now I want to relate that. So I hope that you deal with that issue from the personal aspect, how you deal with the challenges and the barriers of either how you look or how old or how young or old you look or how you look going into the room. And then the other thing is, how do you deal with dealing with your role within the organization and your role as the organization Africa-wide. Why am I asking this? We are in the center of the positioning for the Africa Free Continental Trade Area, and Nigeria is a big player, and I'm sure your bank is a big player. How do you balance that? How do you jump those barriers? And also, I think I'll add another question. I have so many questions. I don't want to load them too much, but from a personal perspective, there's these barriers that happen when you go onto the table and you're representing your bank, or sometimes when you go to the table and you're representing your department, you are speaking truth to authority, truth to power, because compliance issues are not always welcome sometimes in the boardroom. How do you overcome those barriers?
Thank you. Thanks, Fiona. So these are very interesting questions. And I think these are things that people deal with on a day-to-day basis. I've dealt with a fair share of it myself as well. I mean, at the moment, I'm the general counsel here at Infra Credit. A lot of the other GCs that I relate with, whether it's at the AFC or a number of the other sort of financial institutions, are probably people in their 60s.
Absolutely.
And so on. I'm just shy of 40. So a lot of these people would be maybe 10, 20 years older. So it's an interesting dynamic, but I think that there are multiple aspects to it, and I think that these are things that I have paid attention to myself in overcoming them. The first one is just being aware of the cultural dynamics. Certain cultures in Africa, I'll use Nigeria as an example. For instance, we have a certain dynamic that requires that you are, I would say, use a lot of emotional intelligence in dealing with decisions.
Absolutely, yes.
So that I think is a part.
Even in Uganda.
Okay, absolutely. So this is extremely important. And I also think it's important to know your material. If you're very competent and knowledgeable in the matters that you are sort of presenting before these people, it's very difficult for you to be discredited or not respected or not recognized, because the focus now is on the actual subject matter. It's not on whether you've got the experience. You can clearly demonstrate that you've got the experience, the knowledge, the competence to sit at that table and to give a good account of yourself. So I think that sort of paying attention to the cultural dynamics, bringing in a lot of emotional intelligence, making sure that you're competent, you've prepared for your meetings and different engagements, and you go in from a place of authority or a place of confidence, can come in quite handy in dealing with that particular matter. So for me, I had the benefit of watching my CEO, for example, go through his journey. We've worked together for quite some time now. And at our previous job, he was a very young CEO. And so just watching him go through that dynamic, I think, allowed me to learn a lot of live lessons from his experience and the way that he navigated some of these difficulties, to this day. So I've had the benefit of learning directly from him, but these are some of the things that I saw play out in terms of how he managed that situation.
So one, have your material. Two, understand the room, read the room, emotional intelligence. And sometimes that means if you're in a culture that needs you to respect elders, then you've got to do a lot of bowing, right?
Absolutely.
I love the Japanese culture. The younger you are, the lower you bow. It doesn't matter what position you have. And usually when they walk into a room, I think the last person is usually their boss. Usually in Africa, I think the first person in the room is the boss. So understanding the room, reading the room, the emotional intelligence, and that I think comes from maturity, comes from dealing with people. So people skills are huge. But I also hear you speaking about mentorship, identifying people that you want to sort of position yourself against, and then you learn from them. Sometimes as young people, we are just in combat.
with our bosses. We just want to fight what they are, who they are, and everything they represent. But I hear from you that it really benefits us a lot to ensure that we learn from them. I keep telling people that, your tantrums or your how you feel about your boss is not going to keep them awake at night. But it might keep you away from a lot of benefits, and it might actually stunt your growth. So thank you so much for emphasizing the importance of this issue of having a mentor, of identifying people that are probably walking the walk that you'd like to walk in future, and ensuring that you learn lessons from them. Because sometimes as young people, we are determined to make our own mistakes, which can be really costly. So Shadrach, back to the role of ethics, the role of the legal counsel as the ethical godmother of the institution, but also what are some of the, should I say, hacks that you have employed at Inhouse Counsel? Because as in-house counsel, you are doing this, but I can tell you that online we have a lot of people here that are actually private practitioners. I'm seeing a lot of them from Nigeria. We have some listeners from the US. We have some listeners from, we have some listeners from Maryland in the US, yes, and we have some listeners from Uganda. So this is quite a global, and Eswatini. I see somebody from Eswatini here. It's a global group of people that are listening to you. And on Smart 24 TV, we have the whole of East Africa listening to you. So what would you say about, because as private practitioners also,